you're optimistic anyway, so you tend to be aggressive. But then you say, okay, I'm aggressive, so therefore I want to try to be conservative. So you make some estimates and maybe you double it. Well, you're really probably wrong by 6x. What I've always found is that things are 3 times as long and cost 3 times as much as I tend to think when I go into it. And so you have to prepare for that.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey, and I am your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several companies to 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as founded Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And today we have another great guest on that will tell a great story of his journey, John Bean, and he is the founder of Meme or Mem. I'll go with memcpu.com because I'm guessing it's from memory, but I originally went to say Meme, but then I'm like, that doesn't look right. But John, he also came up with a few startups along the way, and he'll tell you a little bit more. One was for an ATM for drugs, and he'll explain that a bit more. Another was for Bridge Medical and in the medical realm, and doing cardio now. And a whole bunch of fun things along the way that led him up to where he's at today. So welcome on to the podcast, John.
Hey, Devin, thanks so much. A pleasure to be here.
So I gave just a very brief intro to a much more in-depth history, or you've accomplished a whole lot more. So maybe let's dive in now and tell us a little bit about your journey and what led you up to MEM CPU.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been doing startups since actually the late 80s. I started with a company called Pyxis in 1989. Pyxis was the ATM for drugs that you talked about. It was back in the days when nurses, the only way they could access medications was through a locked cabinet. And one nurse would have the key and the other nurses would essentially have to search out that nurse when they needed the medication. So Pyxis was essentially a ATM-like machine where nurses would then be able to access the medications themselves using their fingerprint, actually. And that company did really well. It's essentially, the de facto standard around the world for medication storage now and access, I should say, in hospitals. And we were really fortunate with that company. We were acquired in 1996 for $960 million, so almost $1 billion. And 24 years ago, it was quite a feat. And that led into kind of giving me that startup bug. It was a very exciting time. And I went on to, as you mentioned, a company called Bridge Medical. So still in the healthcare field, still in the hospital field. Bridge Medical was a device for essentially sitting at the patient bedside and validating that through barcode, that the right patient was getting the right medication at the right time, through the right route, and things of that nature. So a very important technology there to Cardio Now.
We're jumping in just before.
Sorry.
By all means. So you take the, what I'm calling the ATM for drugs, or what you call the ATM for drugs, and you make a good exit offer, right? You make a good money, good exit. And, first of all, I think it's always, a bit deceiving that you don't get to pocket all of that money yourself, but then just fall into your pocket. Otherwise, it'd be a different story. But, you still probably made a good exit. But so what was did you take a break from that? Did you say, hey, I built a good business, I'm going to take a break? Or is it right next into the next startup and I have the next idea that's even better than the last and I want to build that? Or how did you kind of make that transition from an exit from your first company to doing your second company?
So at Pyxis, I was, a young engineer, and I did well, but I wasn't, it wasn't a life-changing event necessarily. It helped me buy a house and vacation and do lots of things and not worry about salary so that I could go on and do more startups. And essentially, I got that startup bug and it's like, well, I want to keep going on and then, become an executive in the startup world. And in fact, by the time I left Pyxis, I was a director and when I went to Bridge Medical, it was my first position as a vice president. so that I was my first time as an executive within a startup, and it's just been a great journey all along the way. And it just I enjoy working in startups. In some cases, I think that there may be something wrong with me mentally that I enjoy it, because it's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of ups and downs, and it's a crazy situation. However, the people that you work with, it's really all about the people that you work with, because everybody's in it to win it. And you have all type A's, or not always all type A's, but you have people that they're doing everything to succeed. And you don't have people that are just, going to work and reading the paper and not caring about their job. And it's just really, to me, very rewarding to work with people who go into work that, every day can't wait to get in and to try and make a difference in the world.
No, and if you have, if there's something wrong with you, I'm right there with you, in the sense that, whenever typically when people ask me what my hobby is, I usually say startups, and then they say, haha. And I'm like, no, it really is startups. That's usually if I'm thinking about something or doing something, half the time it's on a new idea or chasing a new startup. But, and then I obviously have hobbies beyond that. So now as we kind of circle back, so you got the startup bug, you made a good exit, even if it wasn't or life-changing, had a good one, and it sets you up for the ability to chase in some of the other startups you've done. So you did Bridge Medical, and you talked about how to make sure that medication, at the bedside was done right, or medicated properly. And then I think that as we talked before, you said Cardio Now was the next one. Maybe just jump back into the journey of, where Cardio Now and where that went to.
Yeah, so Cardio Now, so this was in 2000. So Cardio Now, we went into cardiac cath labs, and when they would do the procedures, they would film the procedures using movie cameras, real film movie cameras. And it's all done through they x-ray the whole process while they're running the catheter up through people's veins and into their heart and doing whatever procedure that they're doing. Well, the issue was that to view those films, doctors would essentially have to get the film and view it, and it's in negative form, and it's shaky because it's a film and it's running through a viewer. So we actually took a digital board that we would then integrate onto the cameras in the labs, and splice out the video as it's being captured in analog and convert it to digital. We then would save it to computers inside the hospital, where we provided very high resolution viewing screens and on computers. So the high resolution viewers were, there's many more of them than the number of just movie film viewers that they had. The doctors could look at it in negative or positive if they wanted to, but the key thing was it wasn't shaky. It was easy for them to access. As videos would get older, as the film would get older, they would start to move it off site. So maybe 3 months, 6 months later. So sometimes you have a patient coming in, you'd actually have to get somebody to go and get the video, the movie from wherever it was. And by having it on local storage, they wouldn't have to go and get it. We had much more storage than they had for film canisters. But then we went one step further, and we actually created a cloud and did some of the first streaming of video before YouTube and all these other things. And had we known to apply it in different areas, maybe we would be having a different conversation here as well. But we took all of those digital images, those digital videos. They were lossless compression, so no degradation to the quality of the images, of the videos. Offload them to the cloud. At the time we had, just to give you an idea of costs, we had I think a 0.5 terabyte RAID, and it cost us, I think, $750,000 compared to now where you could buy a 4 terabyte RAID for 120 or something, maybe cheaper, and then sit on your desktop. Anyway, and that RAID was in Iraq. So we did it offline for storage, but then we provided streaming through browsers. Of course, this is time when people still had dial-up modem and things, and we would compress it based on the connection speed. So we would detect the connection speed that somebody had. And if they had the CardioNow system in the hospital, we could actually upload the lossless video to them. But if they didn't have it, they could still view it via a browser. So what was important about that was that in the cardiac field, the people with cardiac issues tend to be older in nature and maybe retired. And so there might be an issue where, like on the East Coast, people live up in the north, and then in the winter, they go to Florida or warmer places. So they could have a cardiac issue in either location, and a doctor could see the past procedures and that had occurred for that patient within, just by going to a browser. So we're really one of the first to do that. And actually, since you're an IP attorney, that was where I got my first patent. And with Pyxis and other things, it was before we really knew. And at the time, most of my work was software and hardware connected, but it was before you could really get software patents until then, when the key issue to that patent was that it was related to the system as a whole. So it wasn't just on the software, as the fact that we did all the compression, we had the servers at the hospitals, we had the cloud, what wasn't called cloud at the time, our co-location facility, and then could stream. And so it was that whole process was actually the first patent that I received.
That's awesome. That's cool. I always love patents, so you're never gonna go wrong with talking about patents.
Awesome.
So, but now but then after you did that, you did that business, built it up, and then you moved over to, I think, one of the next startups you jumped over to that we talked about was one that actually I've seen or heard of, which was Eco ATM, right? Well, that one was almost you can go in, put your cell phone in the machine, and I think I've seen them at Walmart and other places, or at least, some iteration of them, where it will tell you, okay, I'll pay you X amount of dollars for your old cell phone. Is that right?
Well, actually, before Eco ATM and after CardioNow, I did something called Asteris. So Asteris was the first time I had co-founded a company that was with an old colleague of mine from Pyxis. So, and what Asteris was another ATM for drugs. Or what Asteris is an ATM for drugs, but it's for retail prescriptions versus medications in hospitals. So in hospitals, you're talking about loose medications, or medications that are not really loose, but they're individual, they're packaged. But when it comes to a pharmacy, you're talking about medications that have been put into prescription-specific packaging. So, for instance, you and I could have the exact same medication, the same dosage, the same number of pills and everything. However, you'll have a pill bottle that has a label on it with your name and your information. There'll be a pill bottle with my name on it and my information. And because of HIPAA laws and other things, there's no way that we can get those. And they also have to be filled by a pharmacist. So it's not like you could have a vending machine that just has a bunch of common pills, so to speak, and then you print a label as people come to it. So we actually invented a new machine, and the number of my additional patents are on these machines, or related machines that we built and designed to be able. It's kind of like a random access. So no matter what time you show up and in what order people show up, we could get your medications from anywhere within the machine. And so that was a whole new machine as well. It wasn't like we were able to use what we had already done at Pyxis. So okay. So that was Asteris. And then while I was doing Asteris, I got introduced to the people who were doing the Eco ATM. And what was interesting about that was, so my background had been in complex hardware, software systems, and of course, the ATM type of kiosks. And so that was the idea behind Eco ATM, which was to have a self-service machine that people would walk up to, bring their cell phone to, and have the people evaluate, or have the machine evaluate visually and electronically the cell phone, make an offer. And what ended up happening was I started to advise them, and then got really excited about the technology. It was actually pretty crazy, where I was kind of moonlighting for them, where I was working at Asteris during the day. And then at night, I'd go and do work for EcoATM and design and build the software. I had a software team that was in India, and they were 12 and a half hours different. So I'd kind of work until 6 p.m. with Asteris, go home, have dinner, spend a couple hours with my wife and daughter. His daughter was 2 at the time. And then at like 8:30, I'd get on Skype with the team in India, and beyond that until about 2 a.m., go to bed, lather, rinse, repeat. But what was even crazier was that at the time at Asteris, we were opening Europe. And so I was also going to Europe like every 6 weeks for 1 to 2 weeks. So I'm working full-time essentially at 2 startups. I've got a wife and a 2-year-old daughter, and I'm going to Europe for 1 or 2 weeks at a time every 6 weeks or so. It was a really great. That was
a busy time of life.
Yeah, it's amazing that I survived that. But then
jumping in really quick. So one question on that. So I mean, and we'll get to a little bit more of what led to where you're at today. And I know you got a couple more steps in the journey, but you know, some of them I can see a common path, and yet some of them I can't see. You know, so the ATM for drugs is kind of where you started, and it got started in the medical realm, and you know that may have, you know, almost I can see. Then you got to the barcodes, and even you know, cardio now. All those are kind of within the medical realm, and solving you know, solving different device, you know, different issues within that, and even you know, a terrorist. But then when you know, so how was it though? Because EcoATM is certainly not in the medical realm, and you know, is much different. And so, you know, was it the same lessons you learned in the medical realm, you know, startup lessons or something that are applicable across the board? Or is it something to where it's completely new and you had to almost start over or learn new things? Or kind of how was that transition to going into a different industry, which was less known and, you know, it wasn't as maybe as comfortable? Does that make sense?
Well, in startups, there's nothing that's comfortable. You know, in virtually every single startup I've done, not only has the product been built from the ground up, but the market didn't exist at the time. The market didn't exist for Pyxis. Certainly didn't exist for Cardio Now or for Bridge Medical when we first did that. The market didn't exist for Asteris. I mean, there was no ATM for medications at retail pharmacies and hospitals for retail and even employers and things like that. And same with EcoATM. They all have a lot of similarities, but they all have a lot of differences. You can't take anything cookie cutter from one company to the next, regardless of whether or not you're in the same industry or not, but you take those experiences. And so things that may have worked at one company might not work at the next, or things that didn't work at one company might work at the new one. It's a hybrid, and you just have to figure out how to apply it. A lot of it's honestly, you know, instinct, but instinct is built on experience and your immersion into the new market and what you observe.
No, and I think that, you know, because my experience has been, you know, there's, I think that, you know, you do learn some lessons that are across, to your point, there's always things that you have to learn new. And, you know, startup is always an uncomfortable position, because if it's already been done, people have done it, and then you wouldn't be in a startup position. And yet at the same time, there's also commonalities between a lot of startups in the sense that, you know, how to develop an idea, how to, you know, organize a team, how to build it, how to do marketing plan, how to get a business strategy. And so I think that, you know, sometimes we get so pigeonholed with, hey, I've done this and this is my expertise and this is the only thing I'm good at, that you don't really stop to think, hey, a lot of the things and the skills and things I've come up with are applicable in other industries, or, you know, I can do it in other areas if you just would kind of overcome sometimes the fear of, hey, this is something new and uncomfortable and different.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what always motivated me was what we were trying to accomplish as the company. So I never really I never really considered what we did or didn't know. And again, everything that I've always walked into without a market that existed and without a product that existed, and it was always from the ground up. But did I believe in where that was going and what that could mean to, you know, the world or the markets that they were to serve? And it's always one of those things where, you know, one of the things that I look back at and say is that I'm glad that I didn't get into cultish religions, because I essentially, startups were my cult. If I had gone into some cultish religions, I probably would have drank the Kool-Aid, because I, in essence, drink the Kool-Aid at every single startup that I go to. And every single one that I'm in, from the day one, I am totally engaged, totally optimistic, feel that it's going to be the next, biggest thing in the world. And it's going to, change the world. And they don't always, but they, but there's, you have to, suspend disbelief and just, work every day to try and make that thing become a reality.
Yeah, and I think you almost have to have a degree of optimism when you're in a startup. I mean, you almost have to be just a little bit delusional that it's going to work out. Otherwise, if you knew all of the things that would happen along the road, you'd probably give up at the forefront, because nobody would ever be in for that much punishment and ups and downs and unknowing and stress and everything else. And so I think that's a good characteristic that that you almost have to have to be in the startup realm, is a bit of suspend reality or delusion or whatever you want to call it, because I think there's a lot of truth to that. So now as we get back to your journey, so you did that, and you did eco, you worked at the two jobs kind of side by side. And then from there, I think you moved over to UC San Diego. Is that right?
Well, so Eco ATM, I should tell a little bit more about that story, just because it's a really interesting one. So I moved over when we got the seed round, because just working two jobs seemed like it was, had to make a decision. In fact, the CEO at Eco ATM at the time had said, look, John, you need to make a decision. You either need to go back to your other company and dedicate your time there, or you need to dedicate your time here. And it was a really hard decision, because the Asteris was my baby and loved the people, and it's always hard leaving the people. But it just seemed like the Eco ATM was off and running, and that I could make a real difference there. And it was exciting, and glad that I made the decision, so Eco ATM did really well. In 2013, we're acquired by Outerwall. Outerwall owned Redbox and Coinstar, so they looked at it as a strategic acquisition, and they acquired Eco ATM for $350 million. So fortunately there, I was a co-founder after coming on board, and that honestly was a bit of a life-changing event for me, and I'm glad that that all that hard work continued to pay off, or did pay off. And from that, though, what happened was UC San Diego UC San Diego gets about $1.3 billion a year in grants. The amount of IP that they have and generate on a regular basis is absolutely insane. However, their strength isn't commercializing it. So in 2016, they decided to create this a group of entrepreneurs in residence that they bring in, and they took 4 of us from various areas with various different experience levels and different areas of experience, and brought us in to essentially help them commercialize technology. And that is actually where I met the 2 inventors of MEM computing, Fabio Traversa and Max DeVentra. They're 2 PhD physicists that are just, big Einstein brains. And they had come up with this new compute architecture that essentially overcomes the limitations of current compute architectures, not counting quantum. So quantum is a new physics-based compute architecture, but it's still in its infancy, and it seemed like it will become the next generation. Everybody has felt that you couldn't meet those expectations and get that type of performance out of current silicon-based technology. And that's essentially what MEM computing was showing. Was kind of rambling here a little bit, but just one more thing to state before I stop for a second is that these 2 PhD physicists, as physicists, they kind of went back and said, okay, if we're going to design a computer today, knowing what we know about physics and looking at how computers have been designed, they're both electrical engineering experts as well. And they said, there's physics that was left on the table. Our designs go all the way back to the 40s and 50s. Now we've added, transistors and everything, but it's still the same basic design. And they came up with this entirely new architecture that can be realized in not only in silicon, but we can realize it in software. And we didn't, at the time, it wasn't known. When I met still in a theoretical piece, they had a publication that was about 40 or 60 pages long. It had a title on it that was 20 words long, all very deep science. I think in the title I understood 3 of the words, and luckily "and" and "the" were 2 of them. So, but it was clear to me what the implications of the technology were.
Hmm. So, and I think that's an interesting. So you were basically at UC, and I keep wanting to say UC Berkeley for some reason. I have to stop myself. UC San Diego, and doing all of that. And you ran into some people. You said, well, I don't know if I fully understand it, or if I fully appreciate it as much as I could. But I think they're onto something. And he said, I have enough faith and confidence that I'm going to go in with them, or I'm going to go in and kind of build a business around this, build a company, and make this a success. And so now you take that. So you've almost gone through. It seems like if you started out in the medical realm for a while, and you kind of did a lot of medical devices, and then you went more to kind of consumer ATM type, thing of doing that, made a good exit. That one is a little more life changing. And then you said, okay, I want to give back. And so you went and did a little bit more of UC San Diego and how you can monetize a lot of the IP portfolio. And I had no idea that they had such a large portfolio or such access to so much capital. But then, along the way, you said, okay, now I'm going to do my thing. So you went into CPU, doing that up until now. And so that was what, in 2017, 2018 that you started that?
Well, 2016 that we formed it. So we formed it within a couple of months of being there. And actually, I should let you know, I didn't want to do this again. I didn't want to work that hard. I had a life-changing event. I was semi-retired. Was at home. My daughter was now like 5 years old, and I was able to spend, quality time with my wife and daughter. Remember this summer before things really got going, just the amount of time I spent with her and my wife, and, had real vacations and things. And in fact, when I went to UC San Diego, I specifically told them that, so they wanted us to take a company out and commercialize technology. I specifically told them, I don't want to take a company out. What I'd really like to do is maybe I can help you get 2 or 3 companies out, and maybe I can use my network to help build their executive team. And then, if I can become a member of their board or get some options as an advisor or something, I'll get some fringe benefit out of it. But I never had the desire. I never was a CEO, never had the desire to be a CEO. But here I am. There's 2 PhD physicists who know nothing about business. While I've always been the technical guy and very deep technically, this was beyond that. This is deep science. I have a bachelor's in math. I don't have a PhD. And the science was literally over my head. And it was one of these things where if anything goes wrong with the technology, I can't help. It's beyond me. However, of the 3 of us, I know a lot more about business. Therefore, I got to be the CEO, and again, never had the desire, but I've learned so much through being in startups. And one of the huge advantages of being in startups is you're exposed to the business where you wouldn't be in a much larger company. And so through osmosis, I had on the job training enough to get me to start. I knew enough to be able to begin as a CEO, and knew enough about raising money, had been involved in that in past companies, was never really responsible for raising the money, but was always involved in the conversations and had relationships with venture capital and things of that nature. And now just need to go the extra level where not only did I need to talk to them, I needed to sell them, and I need to be responsible for raising the money as well as running the company.
So I'm getting, as we so now that almost brings us up to where you're at today. So, one of the hard things with tech, cursing and a blessing, or blessing and a cursing, whatever you want to call it, is, technology companies, it can take a long time to develop a product, get it out in the marketplace, get it accepted, set the standard and whatnot, as opposed to take what would be a consumer level product or some of the other, or a brand name company or something of that, or services company, you can get it up and going much more quickly. So, what advice would you give, or how do you navigate when you're saying, hey, this is going to be a multi-year project before we even get it out in the marketplace and get it going? How do you have the wherewithal, or what advice would you give to people on that?
Well, it's funny because every single one of my startups has been these extremely complex hardware software systems that take years to perfect. And I've always thought, I wish that I had gone to school for marketing instead of math and computer science, because maybe I would have come up with a pet rock or something that was all it's the marketing and the branding and everything. And now that's not necessarily easy either, but it's not the same mental gymnastics that you have to do necessarily, actually. So anyway, but it happened to be my skill, and I'm always excited about things and one of the things that we're faced with this company too, is that not everybody, but even in academia, what these gentlemen had designed, they were getting a lot of pushback and they thought it was impossible. And one of my trigger points is whenever something is impossible, I just can't accept that. And in my past startups, I'd overcome many things that later experts would tell me that, oh, that was impossible. It's like, well, I'm glad I didn't know, because had I known, maybe I wouldn't have tried. And so I think, part of it is, we talked about optimism earlier. You have to be very optimistic. You have to believe in what the technology is or whatever it is that you're working on. And you just have to bear down and know that it's not something you're going to be releasing in 3 months and being able to demonstrate it to people. And in fact, when I first met these guys, we thought that we're going to be a fabless semiconductor company. We thought that the first thing we're going to have to do is build a chip. Building a chip is something that can take, $30 million in 5 years to build your first version of a chip. It's like raising money for life sciences. You have to raise just huge amounts of money, and it takes years and years to deliver. It's really hard to do, but again, it was one of these things where this technology is so amazing. I thought that if I could do it, I could do it for this technology. But the key thing was, in order to evaluate the technology, I contacted the San Diego Supercomputer Center and said, look, we're going to build a prototype for our chip, a software emulation of a chip. That's what you do when you build the chip normally anyway. And then you test that before you invest in going to the next step of building the hardware. So we built the emulation of the chip in software and then delivered it to the Supercomputer Center to validate it. And would it indeed overcome the issues? Could it show that the chip could overcome the issues that we see in current computers? And what really blew our minds was that the software emulation of the chip was already showing that. It was orders of magnitude faster than anything else that was out there. For instance, they were running it on problems where the best methods were taking, it was a special set of problems that was taking about 30 minutes to solve. Our software emulation of the chip was solving the same problems in sub-second time. And we realized, oh my God, we can go out there as a kind of crawl, walk, run. And actually, maybe that's part of the advice too, to look for ways that you can crawl, walk, run, develop kind of a minimal viable product using some common terms, where you can show the capabilities of the system. So to us, the minimal viable product was building a software as a service model of our software emulation, which we've done. We released it last year as beta, and we're now allowing people to test the technology on their own problems. The testing it's free. If you're doing evaluation and test, we let you use our system for free. And therefore, you don't have to take our word for it. And we've got lots of scientific papers and case studies and things that show the performance that our technology does. But it's free to use if you're skeptical of this technology, as most people are when they first hear about it because it sounds too good to be true. You don't have to take our word for it. You can go right on our software as a service model. You can sign up today, use it for free, and test it on your own and see if we can't solve your problem faster than you're able to solve it using current methods.
Oh, well, that's awesome. So now with all that, you take that, so you've now founded the company, you're well into it, you've been building it, people can now test it, they can try it out. So, so what I think as we now get towards the end of the podcast, and, always more things than I ever have time to talk about, because there's always plenty of interesting rabbit holes we could dive down. But as you do that, and we'll jump to kind of the last couple of questions I always ask at the end of the podcast.
Sure.
So the first question I always ask is, as you've gone along that whole journey, as you've done the different businesses, what was the worst business decision you ever made?
Well, I certainly made bad decisions and continue to make them every now and again. But I think the key thing is that you have to, in a startup environment, you have to make decisions. You can't wait. You have to make decisions on the best information that you have. And then later, if you find out that decision was wrong, you need to adjust. And let me give you an example or an anecdote. So at Pixis, which had gotten very big before I had left, they brought in a new VP over my area. And one time during a review, the VP said to me, "John, in the amount of time that I make 3 decisions, you make 12 decisions and get 6 wrong." And he was trying to tell me that I, didn't deserve a big raise. And I said, wait a minute. Okay. So in the time you take to make 3 decisions, I make 12 and I get 6 wrong. Of the 6 so I got 6 right. I already got twice as many right as you did. Of the 6 that I got wrong, 3 of them were bad and we had to abandon. And just, an average, right? The other 3 were just needed to be changed based on new information, and we adjusted and then moved on. So in essence, I got 9 things right, maybe 3 things wrong, but you can't build innovation without making mistakes. And so, in fact, the way that I run my company and run all my groups and everything is I do not, no one ever gets in trouble for making a mistake. We're gonna make mistakes. What you get is praise for then fixing the mistakes and then moving on and learning from those. But I don't care if people make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. We do make mistakes, but it's how you deal with those mistakes and move forward from them.
Okay. No, I think that's a very good lesson learned. So now that almost dovetails probably into the second question I always ask. But if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, just getting started, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
So the biggest piece of advice is related to your estimates on the amount of time you think it's going to take and the amount of money you think it's going to take. We always, when we first start, with startups and projects and what have you, you try to be conservative and you're optimistic anyway, so you tend to be aggressive. But then you say, okay, I'm aggressive, so therefore I want to try to be conservative. So you make some estimates and maybe you double it. Well, you're really probably wrong by 6x. What I've always found is that things are 3 times as long and cost 3 times as much as I tend to think when I go into it. And so you have to prepare for that. When you raise money, you really need to consider what expectations you set, and based on where you're going to be when you're done with that money, so that you have to be careful that you don't set overly aggressive expectations, because when you raise that money, the valuation and or expectation on the company, if you don't meet that, your next round is going to be harder and at a lower valuation, and on and on and on. So that's the key thing is, really step back, rejudge what your estimates are, and just know that even after you do that, you're still probably wrong. And it's still probably longer and more money. So make sure that you can handle those situations.
But everybody always seems to be the exception, no matter how well you plan. You're like, yeah, everybody. I always hear that it's going to take 2 or 3x longer than I think it will, and more than I think it will. And then you're like, but we're better than that. And I always think it's everybody just needs to understand you're not the exception. And even if you are the one in a million that is the exception, plan as if you're not, because you're going to be a whole lot better. You're going to be a whole lot better situation, because if you somehow miraculously aren't, more time and effort and money than it takes, then by all means you're good for it. But if you're everybody else, it puts you in a much better spot, so you don't get halfway through only to not make it the rest of the way. So, well, great. Well, always more things to talk on, fun things to talk on, and never have enough time. But I appreciate you coming on, so that people that want to find out more about, MEM CPU, they want to reach out, with any question they have for you, or they otherwise want to get involved or get more information. What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, just go find memcpu.com. The company's name is actually Mem Computing, but as a shortcut, it's memcpu. There's contact forms on there. There's places where you can register to use the SaaS for free. There's tons of information about the company, and that's the best way to reach out to us.
All right. Well, I strongly encourage anybody that's wanting to know a whole bunch about awesome computers that are going to do or change the world. Certainly reach out and check them out. And thank you for coming on. For those of you that are have an inventive journey that you'd like to tell, that'd like to tell a story of your startup, your small business, we'd love to have you on. You can just go to inventivejourneyguest.com to apply. And for those of you that are listening to this episode and want to get notified of future episodes, make sure to subscribe. And of course, we're always here to help the startups and small businesses with patents and trademarks. John, thank you again for coming on. It's been fun to have you on, and look forward to the ongoing success of you and the team at MEM CPU or MEM Computing. And thank you again.
Thanks, Devin. It was a pleasure.